Layoffs, factories getting shut down, quality control issues, underwhelming sales figures. You name the problem, and Volkswagen is in it. This is kind of a rapid fall-off that might seem extremely unexpected, as Volkswagen was regarded as one of the most stable brands in existence for the past 30 years or so. As a result, both VW enthusiasts and haters are extremely concerned, as this kind of a shakeup for what is considered as the biggest industry giant in the automotive industry might signal a problem for all the other brands. So, to better understand what this means for the German brand and the future of the automotive industry, stick with us as we take a look at what on earth is going on at Volkswagen. Dieselgate, the first domino in the line of many. Now, to be honest, Volkswagen's fall from grace isn't something that happened out of nowhere. It was a long line of dominoes that reduced the brand's image amongst the public, at one point even vilifying it in the eyes of the common man. Yes, we're of course talking about the infamous Dieselgate scandal, which was the first in a line of catalysts that brought internal combustion engines, and alongside them, Volkswagen, to the verge of non-existence. You see, Volkswagen, in the early 2010s and late 2000s, decided to outfit cars with a GPS device that would allow it to exactly know if it was moving while it was working. If the vehicle behaved like it was in motion, but the GPS device confirmed that it was in a standstill, the car would recognize that it was being tested, and as a result, reduce performance and emissions drastically. Once this was discovered, Volkswagen was in a whole heap of troubles, which resulted in it having to pay upwards of $33 billion in fines, penalties, and buybacks, which left the company's budget thoroughly damaged. It was later confirmed that Volkswagen had started doing this as early as the late 90s and early 2000s, further damaging the brand's reputation. As a result, this kind of dishonesty from Volkswagen has resulted in buyers streaming away from the brand and going for other, more honest offerings, which meant that, in addition to its budget being thoroughly devastated, VW has started rapidly losing customers, further reducing profits. This would turn out to be even more devastating for the brand, because it has heavily relied on brand loyalty and not quality and reliability, which brings us the next problem: premium price, budget quality. Volkswagen has, for the past 30 years, tried to pass itself as a semi-premium brand, despite not being that. This was especially prominent in the mid-2000s and 2010s, at which point VW products, such as the Golf and the Passat, displayed underwhelming interior quality, subpar reliability, mediocre driving characteristics, but cost an arm and a leg. Seriously, imagine paying a premium for your luxurious sedan or hatchback, and then realizing that its thin as air steel isn't even galvanized, and it dissolves like paper. Be honest with us. When have you last seen a Passat B6 or a Golf Mark 6 that isn't as rusty as an average nail in a shed? Now, despite these issues, Volkswagen managed to sell its vehicles well because of the brand loyalty it had built up over the years. But with the Dieselgate scandal, a huge portion of those buyers have started purchasing other vehicles at either that price range or at a price range one step below it, which allowed them to realize that Volkswagen never really went premium, only its price did. As a result, even those that thought of returning to the brand at some point decided against this decision, as they were far better off paying a few dollars more for a Mercedes, an Audi, or a BMW than going for a VW. Now, in the recent years, Volkswagen has cut down on the pricing marginally, making the gap between it and the premium brands less prominent. However, they've also reduced the interior quality, and their reliability took a hit too, albeit it wasn't great to begin with. So if their models got approachable, how come the sales of Volkswagens keep being underwhelming? Well, we might have an answer. A lineup of ugly cars is hardly helpful. There's no avoiding it. Volkswagen is ugly as can be nowadays. Just take a look at the MK8 Golf. It looks like a sad blobfish, for God's sake. and it's among Volkswagen's best-looking models. The Volkswagen Passat B9 is an estate only, and it looks so cheap and so poverty-spec that we wouldn't fault you for thinking that it's some off-brand knockoff of the old Passat. But this isn't even the worst part of Volkswagen's lineup. No. That would be its EV offerings. Just take a look at the ID lineup. It looks so weird and so unceremoniously impotent that you wouldn't be at fault for vomiting when seeing any of them. Volkswagen tried to target the younger audience with this lineup. However, they've forgotten that youngsters don't have the money for a fashion EV. And even when they do, they'd much rather opt for something like a Tesla instead of this bucket of weirdness. In addition to that, other VW products are simply way too boring looking, especially their SUVs. Just look at the Atlas. If you covered the VW brand, we'd honestly think that it's a generic model made for a game or an animated movie. Why couldn't we get the European Touareg instead of this sorry mess? The Tiguan is no better either. But all would have been forgiven if Volkswagen gave thought to how well their vehicles were built and how reliable they were. After all, Toyota is just as boring, but they sell cars by the truckload. Which brings us to the fact that quality control is abysmal. We've already mentioned that the materials used leave a lot to be desired, and we've already mentioned that the reliability isn't great. But the problem is that this also translates to other VAG brands, Audi especially. Just take a look at the newest generation Audi A5 or the Q5, or anything for that matter. Take a look at how they look from the inside. Does that look premium to you? Of course not. It's literally filled with all kinds of horrible interior materials. It utilizes touchscreens instead of physical commands. It's, by all means, cheapness manifested, which is unacceptable for a brand that specifically targets those of us that know better. In addition to that, all of the reliability issues that VW has are translated to Audi, as these brands share almost everything amongst each other. The biggest affront to this is the engines, all of which are utter rubbish. However, as bad as it is, this isn't what hurt Volkswagen badly. Neither of these issues were a substantial problem to Volkswagen on a global scale. Which brings us to the final point of today's video. Chinese brands are taking over. Volkswagen has always been predominantly sold in Europe and Asia, and less so in the US. We've never really had a taste for this kind of a brand, which is why its slow but sure disappearance isn't what resulted in factories closing down and workers getting fired for the first time in the company's history. No. The reason for this is the fact that, in the EU, Chinese brands started crowding the streets much faster than anyone could expect. The first of these was MG, which is now established as a pretty solid and reputable, if underwhelming, brand that offers 90% of what Volkswagen does at 60% of the price. Additionally, with the recent introduction of BYD to the EU market, not just Volkswagen, but all other European manufacturers have all been jeopardized, as BYD simply pisses on whatever the Europeans consider acceptable in terms of performance, efficiency, quality, and utility, especially in the EV segment. As a result of all of these issues, Volkswagen has had to cut down its production and even transfer a lot of its workforce to China to reduce costs and allow for a better positioning in the market. However, this will hardly work, as the Chinese simply have much higher production capacities than Volkswagen could ever have now, and as such, we're sure that an imminent crisis awaits the once untouchable giant. But the thing is, as much as we dislike Volkswagen's ethics, we simply can't help but worry, because this also means that the Chinese are a direct threat to Stellantis, BMW, and Mercedes, meaning that, albeit not directly, we too are going to feel the wrath of these new brands, even though they're not sold here. Furthermore, who's to say that they won't get their share of the US market eventually? After all, many people are calling for them because of their high value for money attribute, and it's just a matter of time before they hit our brands too. All in all, Volkswagen serves as a perfect metaphor for all the Western brands, as their arrogance and the general disdain and dismissal, as well as dishonesty towards their fans, brought them to a grim point that, with every coming year, feels like it has no exit.